The G20 leaders are also working to reform multilateral development banks. They say institutions like the World Bank need to look beyond their founding goal of reducing poverty. Radhika Bajaj has more.
Are the challenges and goals of the world economy the same today as they were in the 1940s when the first multilateral development banks, or MDBs, came into being? That's been a recurring question at G20 meetings, with brainstorming on how these institutions can be reformed to fit into today's world.
MDBs, when they came into existence, the whole globe was in a very different state. And now it has come to a stage where perhaps the goals and the objectives needs to be revisited.
A G20 panel of global experts has issued recommendations underscoring how lending capabilities of MDBs can be enhanced, especially to fund global projects targeted at combating climate change and bolstering sustainability. Importantly, experts say MDBs need to focus on financial inclusion, offering fairer lending terms to those economies that need it the most.
So the cost of capital, if we do not reduce it globally, makes investment and makes growth very, very difficult. And I think this is a really basic global financial inclusion conversation that we must have, and we must strengthen institutions like the IMF and the World Bank to see how they can, reform themselves to be able to do this with using local currency.
The expert panel says MDBs need to triple their current level of financing commitments to meet goals around inclusive growth, climate change and sustainability. It further calls for the setting up of a global challenges funding mechanism for global public goods. So far, the overall lending capacity of the World Bank Group and other multilateral development banks as a whole is about $120 billion a year. Experts say this needs to be taken up to at least $400 billion to meet the challenges faced by global economies. Private capital can bridge the gap. The challenge is convincing private players to participate in what many see as a high-risk, low-reward proposal. Radhika Bajaj, CGTN, Mumbai.
For more on the big summit in India, we're now joined by Jeff Moon, president of the China Moon Strategies. Good to see you again. Whenever we have these very big, leadership type meetings, a lot of talk is always, of course, done, and strong statements. They're calling this one the Green Summit. I was trying to figure out what they meant by that, because the other ones were also kind of the Green Summit too.
You're right, but green is a theme that persists and is one of India's themes. India wants to promote the interests of the global South, and climate and green issues are a major part of that. So they've been talking over the last year about climate finance, a blue economy, which has to do with maritime issues, energy transitions, biofuels, issues like that. Those are the focus.
And of course, if you love politics, it doesn't get any better than this. The Indian presidency is on the line, so to speak, and there's a lot of chatter about it. Talk to us about why this might be significant.
Well, I think India is significant because it's trying to get recognition as a leader of the global South. So it's pressing issues of concern, particularly to developing countries. Some also believe that Prime Minister Modi is using the G20 and this process to promote his own political fortunes domestically. But he seeks to have a broad leadership agenda that he's pursuing through these meetings.
Right, and I would assume that China is also watching very closely. And when you think of these big organizations, everybody wants to be the leader. I guess they want to have leverage in terms of when decisions are made. I mean, there's certainly room for everybody, I'm assuming.
Well, absolutely. There are 20-some members and a broad number of observers. One of the interesting things is that it's evolved over the years. In 1999, all of this started after the Asian financial crisis, and then there was a lot of interest during the financial crisis in 2008. So the focus is on economic issues, but the focus has changed as the issues and time has changed. And another aspect that I think that the press overlooks a little bit is that, yes, there are multilateral issues here, but these kinds of meetings, not just the G20, but other meetings, are also venues for bilateral meetings that are important. I mean, it's important to remember, for example, that in U.S.-China relations, there's been an effort over the past year to increase contacts and stabilize relations. All of that started last year in Bali in November when Presidents Biden and Xi met in a bilateral meeting at a G20 meeting. So the G20 has lots of purposes.
The other area of consternation has to do with, shockingly, money. In the past, the big countries, I should say the big economies, would subsidize or help pay for projects in sort of poorer countries, aka the World Bank. And there's been some talk that the current model that we have been used to needs to change. Can you explain that for me?
Well, I think a lot of that talk is in China, among Chinese leaders. I think that everyone recognizes that there needs to be more funding provided. In the US, for example, President Biden has issued a plan to support the mobilization of up to $200 billion through public and private financing. So everyone agrees that we need to do something. Exactly what we need to do is not particularly clear.
And I don't want to dive too much into the green investment controversy, but there's also some talk that, you know, if you want all these countries to go green, they're asking for some of the other countries, the bigger ones, to essentially help subsidize that. And there's certainly been pushback on that. And we have had agreements in the past when it comes to climate and green energy, but it seems to be really hard to get those to stick. And I imagine part of that is just purely enforcement when it comes to the execution of this. Do you think that might be addressed?
Well, they've definitely been talking about that. Recently, the Sherpas, those are the ones that sort of lead the discussions running up to the G20 meeting, were talking about the phasing out of fossil fuels and possibly setting a target to triple renewable energy capacity by 2030. But there hasn't been any consensus on that. And the G20 is a consensus organization. Any party attending has the right to veto. So it makes it very tough to get agreement and to move toward enforcement.
Very, very quickly, do you think the situation in Ukraine is going to be brought up?
I think that's going to be the major issue. I don't think that they're going to have an overall statement because they will not be able to agree on Ukraine. I think the absence of President Xi makes it more likely that we will not get to an agreement because China was particularly useful in getting to a compromise last year, and I think President Xi's absence means that we may not get to that compromise this year.
What, Jeff, what parameters would you say at the end of this? They always traditionally make a big statement and everybody gets together and does their handshakes. How would you, I guess, grade, or what metrics would you use to consider it a success?
I think it would be a success if they could get a statement that everyone agrees to. If we don't have a statement, you're going to get what's called a chairman's statement, which is India's impressions of what they heard. I don't think that we're going to have any major advancements out of these meetings, but I think they're nonetheless important because they are constant pressure to move parties toward agreement, and you never know when that's actually going to, they're actually going to reach an agreement.
Well, we're going to think positive, and at least people are talking, so that's a good thing. Jeff, really appreciate you. Have a good weekend. Thank you.